All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we're diving into a mystery that's got the internet buzzing, unexplained drone sightings all over the US, New Jersey especially. And it seems like this whole thing has, it's kind of given new life to a pretty wild conspiracy theory. That's right, Project Bluebeam. We've got a whole bunch of sources this time. We're talking news articles, social media threads, heck, even a cryptic Reddit post that claims to have some inside scoop.
Oh, wow.
So picture this, all right? It's the middle of the night, you're in New Jersey, and these massive silent drones are just, hanging out above you, and nobody knows who's flying them or what they're doing there.
I mean, that would creep me out.
Yeah, exactly. It's the kind of thing that sends shivers down your spine. So what we're going to try to do today is cut through the noise, separate fact from fiction, and, maybe figure out why this story has captured the public's imagination the way it has.
What I find interesting is how the lack of clear answers from officials is, it's really feeding the speculation. It's almost like this information vacuum. It's just creating the perfect space for theories, and especially wild ones like Project Bluebeam.
It's true, like nature abhors a vacuum, right? But in this case, it's like our human need for explanations that just can't handle the emptiness. So let's start with the basics, the facts. We've had hundreds of these drone sightings, mostly concentrated in New Jersey and along the East Coast since about mid-November. And what's really striking is how these reports describe them. They're saying they're huge, car-sized, completely silent, and really hard to detect, even on radar.
Yeah, that silence, that's one of the details that really makes these sightings stand out. It's not like your average, hobby drone. This is a whole different,
Right. And it's not just the size and the silence. We've had a family in New Jersey who said their car clock actually changed time while one of these things was hovering above them. I mean, come on.
How do you explain that?
It's like something straight out of the Twilight Zone.
It is. It is. It definitely adds a layer of strange to an already, unusual situation. Now, while there could be some perfectly reasonable explanation, the fact that many of these sightings are happening near military bases and important infrastructure, it raises some serious security questions.
Right, for sure. And then we have the official response, or maybe the lack of a response. The FBI, Homeland Security, the FAA, supposedly they're all investigating. But as far as I know, we haven't gotten any solid answers. The White House has said, they're claiming that most of these are probably manned aircraft, operating legally. But people aren't buying it.
No, the descriptions we're getting and the reported behavior,
they
just don't really line up with normal aircraft.
Yeah, it's strange. And that lack of, a clear message from officials, that just makes these conspiracy theories worse. Even Donald Trump, and, he's not exactly known for holding back his opinions. He's weighed in on this. He's demanding more transparency from the government and even suggesting we should shoot down any drones we can't identify. And then there's Congressman Jeff Andrew. He's from New Jersey. He's got a pretty interesting theory, a little dramatic. He's saying these drones could be launching from a hostile mothership off the coast.
A mothership?
Yeah, a mothership. He even suggested it could be like China or Iran.
His statement certainly got people's attention, but it's really important to remember that there's no evidence right now to support any of that. No mothership evidence. But it does highlight the level of worry and speculation surrounding all these strange sightings.
It's like everybody's looking for an answer. They want to make sense of it all. And while the official channels are staying quiet, it's not a surprise that people are turning to, let's call them alternative explanations. And this is where Project Bluebeam comes in. It's a conspiracy theory that's having a bit of a comeback. With all this, uncertainty in the air.
It's the perfect example of how these theories thrive in times when people feel like they're not getting the full story. When officials aren't giving us answers, when people are going to seek out explanations, they try to fill in the gaps. And Project Bluebeam, with its whole dramatic, almost cinematic premise. It's like a prepackaged explanation, right? Ready-made, even if it's a bit far-fetched.
So for those who might not be familiar with this particular theory, can you give us a little rundown of what Project Bluebeam is all about?
Sure. It goes back to the 1990s. A Canadian journalist named Serge Monis, he was the first to propose it. The basic idea is that there's this, secret group of global elites, and they're planning a massive worldwide hoax. We're talking a fake alien invasion or some other huge supernatural event, all done with high-tech stuff, holographic projections, mind control, that sort of thing.
And what would be the point of all this? What's the end game, according to this theory?
Well, they say it's all about manipulating people, the entire world population, into accepting a one-world government, a totalitarian one, of course. It's like a global-scale fear campaign, you see. Make people so scared and so desperate that they just give up their freedom for a sense of security.
That sounds like a sci-fi movie, but you're right, it seems like this idea is gaining traction again.
Oh yeah, especially online. Social media has been a huge factor in spreading this theory. We've seen figures like Roseanne Barr and Alex Jones. They've got a big following, especially among people who already distrust the mainstream narrative. And they're openly connecting these drone sightings to Project Bluebeam. They're pointing to them as evidence, saying the first stages of the plan are already underway.
And these alleged stages are pretty out there, right? I've heard about earthquakes that unearth fake artifacts, holographic religious figures appearing in the sky, even technology that can directly mess with people's minds and emotions.
It's a pretty elaborate scenario, that's for sure. And while there's no credible evidence for any of it, that underlying idea that powerful forces could be using technology to deceive us, and not just on a small scale, but on a massive scale, that taps into some very real anxieties people have, especially with the world the way it is now.
For sure. It's like a reflection of our growing awareness that technology has this power to shape how we see things, to manipulate our reality even. I mean, with deepfakes and all that, AI creating incredibly realistic fake videos, the line between what's real and what's fake, it's getting blurrier every day.
Deepfakes are the perfect example. Imagine a video that's completely real showing a world leader declaring war or admitting to some huge conspiracy, even if it's debunked later. The initial impact, the seed of doubt it plants. That could be incredibly powerful.
And that's what makes Project Bluebeam so unsettling, I think, even if it seems outlandish. It plays on our fears about technology, being used not just for fun or convenience, but for control, for manipulation on a scale we can barely imagine.
Right, it preys on our fears about who's really in control. In this world it's becoming more and more technologically complex all the time. But even if we consider the possibility that someone could pull off a global hoax like this, the question that keeps coming back to me is, why? What would be the motive? What's the goal behind all of it?
That's a good point. It's one thing to think about the how, the technology, the resources, all the coordination, but the why, that's where these theories often fall apart. Project Bluebeam seems to rely on this idea of a power-hungry group that wants to rule the world, but is that a good enough reason to justify such a complex and risky plan?
You make a good point. Conspiracy theories often struggle with that, explaining the motive. Why would they do it? They tend to just say it's shadowy elites who want power. It's a convenient villain,
Yeah.
A catch-all explanation that doesn't really hold up when you look at it closely.
Maybe that's part of the appeal, though. These theories offer simple answers to complicated questions. They give a sense of order, in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
I think there's definitely a psychological comfort in having a clear enemy, someone to blame for all the world's problems. It can be strangely empowering, even if that enemy is completely made up. But it's a dangerous kind of comfort, because it leads to distrust, to division, and even violence sometimes.
You're absolutely right. We've seen how these kinds of beliefs can play out in the real world, and it's not a pretty sight. It's a serious reminder that we need to be very careful about the information we consume and how we process it.
Absolutely, especially with social media, where misinformation can spread so quickly. We need to be thoughtful about the information we see. Always question the sources. Consider different perspectives.
Which brings us back to those drones and the question of whether there are any explanations that are, more grounded in reality. Project Bluebeam is a catchy story, but are there any possibilities that don't involve global conspiracies and fake alien invasions?
There are a few, actually. And some of them are pretty interesting. Some experts like Vijay Kumar from the University of Pennsylvania, they think these drones could be part of a U.S. government operation.
Really? That's a different take on things. But if that's the case, why all the secrecy? You'd think they'd be upfront about it, especially if it's all legal.
You would think, right. But government agencies, especially those dealing with intelligence and military stuff, they're not exactly known for being open about their activities, even when those activities are perfectly within the law.
So it's possible that these drones are doing surveillance, or testing some new technology, or involved in some secret operation they don't want the public to know about. It's like a real-life spy movie.
Exactly. And those sightings near military bases, well, that definitely supports this idea. Also, the bigger drones have been seen with the lights you'd expect on aircraft in U.S. airspace, which means they're not trying to be totally invisible.
That's a good point. It suggests they're operating within some sort of established framework, even if we don't know what that framework is. But if these drones are part of a U.S. government operation, what does that say about transparency and public trust?
It raises some important questions about balancing national security with the public's right to know. In a democracy, we need a certain level of transparency from our government. When they operate in complete secrecy, it undermines trust, and it can lead to more conspiracy theories.
It's a tough situation, isn't it? The lack of information feeds suspicion, but giving out too much information could compromise security.
It's a difficult line to walk. And even if these drones turn out to be harmless, the way the government has handled this, the lack of communication, the vague answers, that's not helping. It could be making the misinformation and distrust even worse.
It's a good reminder that how information is managed and communicated, it's just as important as the information itself.
Absolutely. But it's important to look at other explanations too. Some experts, like Missy Cummings from George Mason University, well, they're skeptical about those reports of massive drones.
What do they think it could be then, if not these huge silent drones everybody's describing?
They suggest it might be smaller, manned aircraft, maybe even commercially available drones, being flown for who knows what reason. They point out that large drones would be much harder to operate without being detected, and they question why a foreign adversary would risk such an obvious operation.
So we're left with a lot of possibilities. Unexplained sightings, conflicting reports, whispers of government secrecy, and a resurgence of this decades-old conspiracy theory. It's enough to make anyone's head spin. What are your thoughts on all of this? Where do we go from here?
It's a fascinating situation, no doubt. It's like we're at the edge of a mystery, peering into the fog, trying to make sense of these shadowy figures. We've got bizarre events, conflicting reports, official silence, and a public that's hungry for answers. It's the perfect storm for speculation and anxiety.
It really is.
And it's a case study in how quickly misinformation can take hold, especially in a world where we're all so connected. It shows how easily our fears of the unknown can be amplified and exploited.
So for our listeners, for those who've been following this strange story, what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from all of this, even without any definite answers?
I think the most important thing is to remember to think critically. We need to be skeptical, not just of official statements, but of everything we encounter, especially online. It's about evaluating sources, looking for biases, and considering different viewpoints. Don't just accept things at face value, especially when they seem outlandish or play on our fears.
You're absolutely right. It's about having a healthy sense of skepticism without dismissing everything as a conspiracy. So let's say these drones do turn out to be part of some secret government program. Does that mean we should just blindly trust that they're doing what's best for us?
No, not at all. Blind trust in any authority is never a good idea. It's about demanding transparency and accountability from our leaders, and having thoughtful discussions about what these technologies mean for us, whether we're talking about government surveillance, corporate espionage, or even just some high-tech pranksters. These drone sightings force us to ask some big questions about privacy, security, and how technology should be used responsibly.
It really does. It reminds us that technology is developing faster than we can fully understand it, both the good and the bad, and that can be a pretty unsettling thought.
It is, but it's also an exciting time to be alive. The key is to stay informed, to stay engaged, and don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. The truth might be out there, but it's on us to find it, to sift through all the noise and find those nuggets of understanding.
Well said. Maybe by the time we revisit this topic, we'll have some real answers about those mysterious drones. But even if the mystery remains unsolved, the exploration, the critical thinking, the willingness to embrace uncertainty, that's where the real value lies. So to our listeners, keep looking up, keep asking those questions. And remember, don't let the fear of the unknown overshadow your sense of wonder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Yeah, it preys on that unease we all have, you know. So who's really calling the shots in this whole tech landscape that just keeps getting more and more complex? But even if we entertain the idea that someone could actually pull this off, this global hoax, I mean, the question I keep coming back to is why? Like, what would be the motive, the ultimate goal behind something like that?
Yeah, good point. It's one thing to imagine the how, right? The technology, the resources, the whole coordination of it all. But the why, that's often where these conspiracy theories kind of start to fall apart, don't they? I mean, Project Bluebeam seems to be banking on this idea of a power-hungry group that wants to just take over the whole world. But is that motive really enough to justify such a wild and risky plan?
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point, right? These theories often struggle to give a a logical or a convincing reason for these schemes that they're proposing. They tend to fall back on these broad generalizations about shadowy elites and their never-ending hunger for power. It's like this convenient villain,
Yeah.
this catch-all explanation that doesn't really hold up if you look at it too closely.
But maybe that's part of the appeal, right? They offer like these simple answers to these really complicated questions, and it gives people a sense of order, a sense of control maybe, in a world that feels, well, often pretty chaotic and unpredictable.
There's definitely a psychological comfort, right, to having a clear enemy that you can point to, someone to blame for all the problems in the world. It can be strangely empowering in a way, even if the enemy is, well, completely made up. But it's a dangerous kind of comfort because it can lead to, distrust and division. And even violence sometimes.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen how these beliefs can manifest in the real world, and it's rarely a good thing. It's a reminder that we need to be incredibly careful about the information that we consume, and how we process it.
Absolutely, especially in this age of social media where misinformation can spread like wildfire. We need to be, discerning. We need to question our sources and try to look at things from different angles.
Which brings us back to these drones and the question of whether are there any other explanations that are maybe a little more, well, grounded. I mean, Project Bluebeam it's a compelling story, but are there any other possibilities that don't involve these global conspiracies and holographic alien invasions?
There are a few actually, and some of them are pretty interesting. Some experts, like Vijay Kumar from the University of Pennsylvania, he thinks these drones could actually be part of a U.S. government operation.
Really? Wow, that's definitely a different spin on things. But if that's the case, why all the secrecy? Why wouldn't they just, be upfront about it? Especially if these activities are totally legal.
Well, you think so, right? But government agencies, especially those involved in intelligence and military operations, they're notoriously reluctant to share information about what they're doing, even if it's all above board.
So these drones could be, I don't know, conducting surveillance, testing new technology, or maybe engaged in some other kind of clandestine mission that they don't want the public to know about. It's like a real life spy thriller, right? Happening right over our heads.
Exactly. And the fact that these sightings are mainly near military bases, that definitely supports this theory. It's also interesting that the larger drones, they've been seen with the lights that are required for aircraft operating in U.S. airspace. Which suggests they're not really trying to hide completely.
That's a good point. It does kind of suggest that they're operating within some sort of established framework, even if we don't know what that framework is exactly. But if these drones are part of a U.S. government operation, I mean, what does that say about transparency and public trust?
It raises some really important questions about how we balance national security with the public's right to know, right? I mean, in a democracy, we need a certain amount of transparency from our government. When they operate in total secrecy, it can really erode public trust and it can create a breeding ground for these conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? The lack of information just fuels more speculation and distrust, but revealing too much could compromise national security. It's a tricky situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if these drones turn out to be totally harmless, the way the government's handled this, the lack of clear communication, the vague statements, that's not helping. It could be adding to the spread of misinformation and distrust.
It shows how important it is to manage information and communicate it well. I mean, it's just as important as the information itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. But we also need to consider other explanations too. Some experts, like Missy Cummings from George Mason University, she's pretty skeptical about the size of the drones that people are reporting.
Oh, really? So what does she think it could be then? If not these massive silent drones that everyone seems to be describing?
Well, she suggests it could be small manned aircraft, maybe even commercially available drones, being operated for some unknown purpose. She points out that larger drones would be much harder to operate without being detected, and she questions why. Why a foreign country would risk such a blatant operation.
So we're left with this whole web of possibilities, right? Unexplained sightings, conflicting reports, whispers of government secrecy, and this resurgence of this decades-old conspiracy theory. I mean, it's a lot to process. Where do we go from here? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to take in. And
Yeah.
it's like we're standing on the edge of this big mystery, peering into the fog and trying to figure out what these shapes are, what they mean, unexplained events, conflicting stories, officials keeping quiet, and the public wants answers. It's the perfect recipe for speculation and honestly, anxiety.
Oh, it really is.
It's like a textbook example of how fast misinformation can spread.
Yeah.
Especially these days with everybody online and everything. It just shows you how easily our natural fears of the unknown can be, they can be amplified, twisted.
So for our listeners out there, the ones who've been following this whole strange story, what's the main takeaway here? What can we learn from all of this, even if we don't have, all the answers?
I think the most important thing to remember is to, think critically. We need to be skeptical, and not just of what the officials are telling us, but of everything we see and hear, especially online. It's about looking at sources, understanding biases, and being open to different points of view. Don't just take things at face value, especially when they seem outlandish or when they play on our fears.
Right. You need that healthy skepticism, but without just dismissing everything as some crazy conspiracy. So let's say, for argument's sake, that these drones are part of some secret government program. Does that mean we should just, trust blindly that they're doing what's best for us?
No, of course not. Blind trust in any authority, in anyone, is never a good thing. It's about holding our elected officials accountable, demanding transparency, and having real discussions about what these technologies mean for us. Because whether it's government surveillance or corporate espionage, or heck, even just some high-tech pranksters, these drone sightings raise some really important questions about privacy, security, and how we use technology responsibly.
It does make you think. It's like we're in this world where technology is advancing so fast, faster than we can even fully grasp its impact. I mean, for better or for worse. And that can be a little unnerving, right?
It is, but it's also an incredibly exciting time to be alive. The key is to stay informed, stay engaged, and don't be afraid to ask those tough questions. The truth might be out there, like they say, but it's up to us to find it, to sift through the noise and find those bits of understanding.
Well said. Maybe next time we talk about this, we'll actually have some answers about these mysterious drones. But even if we don't, the exploration, the critical thinking, the willingness to sit with the unknown, I think that's where the real value is. So to our listeners, keep looking up, keep asking those questions, and remember, don't let the fear of the unknown take away from your sense of wonder. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.